Of importance may be totally different from one negotiation to another. One thing may not be a big issue, but those things are all present in every negotiation. So a couple of you, talking about communicating value, are addressing what I call sales negotiation, which is its own challenge. And I personally think it's tremendously challenging. I didn't structure today's thing to talk much about that topic, although, by the way, if people want to talk afterwards, I'll be around and I'm happy to help. But I'm going to start with a couple of very basic things, and if you'll be patient with me, you'll see how it all fits together. But it's supposed to give you an insight into the structure of a negotiation. And having that insight will answer a lot of questions about walking away, what is possible in the deal. So who am I? I'm a lawyer, had a career of something like 45 years, all of my time as a business lawyer. So I worked in various business organizations, a lot of them big international companies. And the negotiating is fascinating to me because it's an exercise in human psychology. It's all about intangibles. But those intangibles end up with very tangible results, as I was saying. They end up with numbers in your income statement. And how you get from those intangibles, which have to do with human psychology in large part and markets, into the tangible result is the challenge. So I'm going to ask, I will prick the bubble now, seize the bull by the horns and say, what do we all know about negotiating? We all think we know about negotiating. It's win-win, right? We're supposed to be win-win. So I have a question, and maybe I should bring the mic along for it. But I'd like to volunteer as to what is win-win? What does it mean? Anybody? All right.
Win-win scenario is literally both parties will profit and literally get exactly what they have, generally on fair terms. It's not that you got a fair benefit or they got a fair benefit. It's literally an even deal.
An even deal. Okay. Anybody else?
Right here.
All right. Sorry. Let's go here first.
Well,
Should be on.
hello?
It's okay.
Whether it's an even deal or not doesn't make any difference, I don't think. It's whether it's win-win is when both sides feel like they got what they want, whether they really did or not. It's very subjective, you don't know. But as long as they feel like they walked away with what they wanted, then it's a win-win situation.
Okay, good. Let's do one more. I think you have that.
Armando. An agreeable compromise of both parties.
Okay. Agreeable compromise. All right. So here's the point I have on this topic, which is what we just said was both parties feel that they're better off with the agreement than they would have been otherwise. Now, is there anybody here that will enter into an agreement that they don't think makes them better off than they would have been otherwise? Raise your hand. Anybody would enter into that agreement? You would enter into an agreement that makes you worse off than you would have been without the agreement?
Yes, sir.
Okay, why would you do that?
So I can learn.
Okay. So you are the exception, I think it's fair to say.
Of course I am.
Yes. So most people would not enter into the agreement that puts them in worse terms than they would have been otherwise. So I guess what I'm saying is, if that's what the term win-win means, and most people think that's what it means, it doesn't really tell us anything about the approach to a negotiation. It just tells us that to get an agreement, people ought to feel they're doing better by agreeing. So it still begs the question, what is our approach to a negotiation? How do we make ourselves the most effective? Negotiation is not primarily about style. A good negotiator knows the score. So let me ask you another question. True or false? The greatest general never orders a retreat. Who thinks that's true? Nobody thinks it's true. Because we all know that the general's job is to read the situation. He cannot remake every situation.
I don't think that's true.
that the greatest general never orders a retreat? Right. That's correct, and you agree with everybody else. Nobody raised their hand for that.
Well done. I did.
You think the greatest general never orders a retreat?
I think the greatest general does retreat.
Yes, I agree, and I think everybody else agrees. So why is that? Because the general's first job is to read the situation. The point being, of course, that as a negotiator, a good negotiator understands the power dynamics. They understand whether their hand is weak or strong. So they're not going to overplay their hand. Some situations you're lucky to just get out of without a significant loss. Others, you have an opportunity for a great gain. Now, I'm going to ask, if you look at the printout, the PowerPoint that was handed out, I don't know if I don't think I have enough copies for everybody, but if you can share, look on, okay? So I pose the question, what is a negotiation? Again, be patient, we're getting there, but what is a negotiation? Now, textbook definitions, I got a couple off the internet. Negotiation is a method by which people settle differences. Or it's a discussion aimed at reaching an agreement. Now that's true, but the definitions I have on the slide are intended more to make us think about what we're trying to do, not just sort of an abstract definition. Let me read you a couple of them. A process of lowering the other party's expectations.
Anybody see it?
Now think about it. We do in many cases, right?
I'm
We
an
have
expert
somebody
at
that
this,
wants
by the
an
way, if
unrealistic
anybody
price.
needs it.
We're going to have to lower their expectations. A learning process by which we discover market value. Remember, negotiations are not conducted in perfect markets. They're conducted in imperfect markets, meaning nobody's too sure of the value of the business, the product, the service, the lease even. And so we're trying to discover it. Collaborative generation of ideas, joint decision-making process, very important because every negotiation, again, in its bones, represents a decision-making tree. Right? So you have to make decisions, but you also have to force decisions from the other side. An exercise in risk management. What is the risk in a negotiation? Anybody want to tell me?
That you don't win.
You give up too much.
Did you give up too much? What is the thing that people are anxious about when they're at the table?
Making a deal.
Sorry?
Making the deal. Getting the close.
Making the deal, meaning does the deal fall apart, right?
Making a bad
Yeah.
delivering the goods.
Right. Okay, so I think one of the fundamental risk things, other than you didn't perform as well as you could have, is you lose the deal. If the deal represents a potential better outcome than you have available otherwise, which we just said was why you agree, then you're afraid of the other party walking away. So you're testing to see how much you can achieve without them walking away, right? That's basically, in simple terms, what goes on an awful lot of the time. And as somebody said, how do we know when the customer will say it's too much? Now, if you look at the graphics, I illustrate two things. I think this is very important. In general terms, very general terms, I think there are two types of negotiation. One I call dividing pies, and one I call making pies. Now, in game theory, you have something called a zero-sum game. You've probably heard that term. So when somebody is buying and selling an asset, and there's not a lot of other things going on, there's no continuing relationship, there is no change to the asset, there's no service, it's just buying and selling an asset. And that's most of our negotiations. The parties have no interest, no common interest other than that the transaction happens. So the win-win talk and the rest of it is kind of irrelevant. The other party in many cases could walk away being very frustrated, but if you got good terms, you're fine. You have nothing to do with them again. The second type of negotiation, that's what I call making pies. There, two parties are cooperating. A typical example would be a partnership or joint venture or other thing where they're working together in the future. And they're trying to create more value out of this. They're not dividing the value of an existing asset and seeing who pays who more for it. They're working on something that has the potential maybe to be worth 10, 20, 30 times as much as they started out at. Now, it's in that second category that as a negotiator, you have to be sure that you understand the interests of the other party. So I call that interest-based negotiating. And that is what people often have in mind when they're talking about win-win. It's not most of our negotiations. These situations where you are creating partnerships, joint ventures, and different things are not most of them. Although some of our relationships are ones that have a future relationship. For example, you say, I'm selling to my customer. If the customer goes away mad, I'll get bad word of mouth, the customer won't come back. Right, that's a continuing relationship. So that is a context in which you're worried about whether they have satisfied their interests properly. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to focus mostly today on the dividing pies example. Anytime I think of this, I always remember the story about Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra went to the pizzeria, and
You've got 10 minutes left.
huh?
You've got 10 minutes left.
I have 7 minutes left?
10.
10 minutes. I thought we went till 1. No?
12:40.
You come and negotiate. That's a demonstration.
Okay, maybe I can buy more time. Can I buy more time? So Yogi Berra goes to the pizzeria, and the lady serving him says, he orders a pie, and she says, would you like that cut in 4 pieces or 8 pieces? And he says, well, 4 pieces, I'm not hungry enough to eat 8. And this is the pie. The pie is the pie is the pie, right? You're dividing the pie. It doesn't get bigger based on how often you slice it. Now, what is the source of negotiating power? If you need power in negotiation, what is the source of power? I think a lot of people have trouble answering this, even though they may be people that negotiate all the time, and they kind of know on some level, but they haven't really thought about it and articulated it. What is the basis for negotiating power?
Being willing to leave.
Anybody else?
I would say being able to give the other person what they're wanting in the negotiation and it still being beneficial to you.
Yes, I agree with you in some sense, especially if you have a unique selling proposition. But in the dividing the pie situation, not so much. It's a little bit different. So let's stick with that for a minute, although you're making a good point.
Perceived value.
Perceived value. But that would be either an advantage or disadvantage depending on the buyer or the seller. Yeah.
To be able to satisfy the interests of the other party and at the same time provide for yourself a point where you're able to do business with them. In other words, satisfy all of their interests and make sure I've satisfied and got the minimum of what I will accept, at least at that point.
The minimum of what you accept, right. And what would you call the minimum of what you'd accept? You have another term for that?
Profit level where
Okay, you're hitting on exactly the point. The power, relative power in this zero-sum divide the pie thing is a function of alternatives. So your next best alternative to the negotiated agreement, you must never agree to something that's worse than the terms you otherwise have available, right? Common sense. That's why we said at the outset, the agreement always represents something that the parties think is better than their other alternative, right? So, but a lot of times people don't know what their best alternative is. Now, I'm speaking here about a significant negotiation. I'm not talking about haggling with someone at the flea market or something. Just go to town and do that. But I'm saying if you have something that's important to you, major negotiation, you must do research. You must think it through. You must know your best alternative, and you must try to understand the other party's best alternative, right? And what I call the deal zone, which is illustrated in these things, is the difference